Now, the Senate has condemned the recent spate of attacks in Benue State, which has left over 200 people killed in Yelwata community in Guma local government area of Benue. Now, addressing Senate correspondents in Abuja, Chairman of the Senate Committee on Media and Publicity, Yemi Adaramodu, says the Senate is tired of mourning and observing a minute's silence for victims and has called for urgent security measures to restore normalcy in the affected communities. The Senate disclosed that it had approved appropriations that should be enough to aid the performance of the security agencies.
The Senate, together with the House of Representatives, we had made sure that we have done enough appropriation that can aid the performance of our security agents in making sure that the fight, the war against banditry, terrorists, kidnappers, and even Boko Haramists. And nobody can say that the engagements that we have had with the security agencies so far, which are doing about 11, had not yielded results. But the sporadic outbursts of these disasters, especially which is now somehow very pertinent to an area in Nigeria, Plateau, Benue. We know that with the new efforts that we are making, especially, and we want to say thank you, want to appreciate Mr. President that will be going together to Benue, that will be going to Benue State tomorrow to meet with critical stakeholders, at the same time commiserate with our people there. So, and together with our own efforts and then our meeting there, because all I know and what we want to say is that in Nigeria we are even tired of paying condolence visits. We must put a stop to it.
I'm now joined by Dr. Joseph Ochogwu, Director General, Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, to discuss developments in Benue State. Thank you so much for joining us on News Night.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's not just the Senate that's tired of the killings and unnecessary bloodletting in Benue, whether you're talking about the Plateau, parts of Nasarawa, Niger, all across the country. But I mean, in the case of Benue State, some experts say it's a complex mix of different fundamental issues, and so it makes it even more difficult to address. Why do you think first off, let me get your insights on the Benue situation and why it remains intractable.
I think it is regrettable, it is disheartening, and it is quite appalling, you know, with the kind of event that has taken place in Benue. But I can say that if you look at historical and trend analysis, you will discover that this is not just something that just happened. Since 1999, you know, after the transition to civilian democracy, it was like a cocktail. A bottle that has been boxed was opened up in the country, and then you find a lot of agitations in different parts of the country in terms of people expressing themselves in different ways. So you look at the issues around Benue within the context of the fact that there are resource conflicts which are traditional conflict issues, you know, over farmer header issues.
Right.
Those kind of issues are resolvable. Yes, they are resolvable, and there are traditional mechanisms for how perhaps the headers and the farmers have lived in centuries, particularly these particular communities. In the last 100 years, they've lived together, they've had their differences, they've been able to resolve the problem. The question we must ask ourselves is that why is it now difficult, you know, to resolve?
Why is it? Let me throw
Yes,
that
I
question
think
back to you.
absolutely. This is where the criminal component and the global jihadi component, you know, comes to play. It becomes a mix. And why is that a mix? That is a mix because, one, we have very weak local governance system in Nigeria. We must come to terms with that reality. And where you have this absence of weak local governance systems, rural governance becomes nearly difficult. And what that I'm trying to say is that even if you deploy all the military security forces, you know, all the kinetic approaches into these theaters and all that, you might still find them recurring, you know, back and forth. Because after you do clearance operation and all that, you go back, these elements will still come back again. So it's a form of asymmetric warfare. So like I said, I think the importance premium we must place, you know, using this as an opportunity, you know, to do things differently is the issue first and foremost on the issue of local governance. To capacitate the local government, you know, to be in place, because the local government is the frontline tier of government for conflict resolution management and prevention, you know, at the local level. So if local governments are weak, in some places near non-existent, then what do you expect? You can't deploy the military everywhere. A second opportunity also that we need to begin to reinforce now, you know, is the issue of state policing and community policing. And I think that the time to politicize some of these things, we no longer have that luxury of time, you know, to continue to politicize these approaches in terms of conflict prevention, conflict management, and conflict resolution. The federal government is doing certain interventions in terms of addressing the farmer header issues. You know, we have the National Livestock Transformation Plan. We also have a dedicated ministry at the federal level. At the federal level. We also have what they call the El-Press Livestock Initiative with the World Bank and the federal government of Nigeria. We also have agri-sal interventions, and these are huge sums of money dedicated for this kind of interventions.
When they are at the federal level, how much impact really can they have? No, because you stress that point.
Yeah, like agri-sal, for example, have state-level branches, but this is where I'm going to come now. Both the federal government and the state government, they are all at a centralized point. Benue, for example, is in Makurdi. So if you look at Guma, Gwe, Agatu, and some of these places, they are very remote areas. Even if you come to the local government headquarters, you might have to go some almost 100-kilometer stretch, perhaps deficit of rural infrastructure also. So I think that it is high time we begin to focus attention on rural development, you know, on rural rejuvenation, innovations in rural areas. Majority of the youth population, for example, in rural areas is what Karl Marx called unemployed youths, lumpen proletariat, who no longer go to farmlands, you know, who of course take the opportunity of either riding Okada and some into criminality, and those elements to become elements that strange forces too align with. Don't forget that we are dealing with also transnational organized crime as well as global jihadi groups, you know.
Absolutely.
And they know no boundaries. So we need to begin to see how we isolate, you know, the criminal terrorist elements within this whole conflict ecosystem. And then we can easily begin to address the farmer header crisis, you know, which, like I said, the headers need the farmers and the farmers need the header, you know, for their businesses to thrive. For
their livelihood. Now, the president will be visiting Benue tomorrow, and he plans to have a town hall meeting. The president has continually said, look, there is a need for us to have peace, you know, good neighborliness and all of that, which gives a sense that the president believes that, you know, to a very large extent, this has to do with, you know, communal clashes and what have you. Set an agenda for the president's visit tomorrow. How best do you think he should begin to address, you know, these issues in Benue State at the fundamental level and in a sustainable, you know, way too?
I think what Mr. President is doing is what we call confidence building measure for stakeholders. For the stakeholders in Benue State to understand that the federal government, represented by Mr. President, is fully in charge and is ready to provide all the necessary support, both kinetic and non-kinetic supports, to ensure that this thing comes to an end. So this provides opportunity for people along different identity lines within the state to come together to have one voice. Because it's important that they have one voice. Because once they have that voice, it becomes difficult for this criminal element to begin to use the identity fault line to create a division, you know, within the society and further carry out the level of carnage that they are carrying out. So we are talking about stakeholder consultations among Christian Muslims, indigenous, non-indigenous people who are resident in those places there, traditional institutions, religious institutions, and everybody in that place, through that kind of stakeholders engagement, to have a one voice that no, enough is enough. We must come together, irrespective of our religious differences, political differences, and all that, to end this carnage. And it is only that way now the military security apparatuses will now begin to isolate, the criminal elements from this. I'm so happy
and
that
deal with them.
Yes, I'm so happy that the governor of Nasarawa says some arrests also were made in Udega, local government area of his state. So you can see that there is even a joint border cooperation.
Right.
And like I said, this crisis is not a first time. It's not a first instance occurrence. Nasarawa, Benue, Taraba have been actually an axis of crisis, at times ethno-religious, at times communal, at times with different ethnic militias and all that. But what we are seeing now is a completely different ballgame altogether, and that is why it's important, for all the different stakeholders, as Mr. President is going there, for them to have one voice and to have a commonality of purpose so they can engage properly.
Now that it's a different ballgame as you describe it, how does the whole idea of peace and conflict resolution apply, in the context of what we're seeing in Benue State? To what extent really can you use, deploy peace and conflict resolution mechanisms to resolve the faceted issues?
The first thing, first and foremost, is what Mr. President is doing, which is confidence building.
Right.
To build confidence in the state system, know that we are here for you to provide all the necessary support that we need to provide. In terms of conflict resolution, now whatever differences among these different stakeholders, you can put up a framework of engagement, to ensure that these different identity fault lines, either Christian, Muslim, Fulani, Vidoma, Itulu, all the various groups that are in that place have a one voice against violence. Because the violence affects everybody. The violence in that place is affecting the herders as well as it's affecting the farmers.
How do you address the external forces? So
this is where I talked about the criminalization of violence and the criminalization of conflict.
Right.
The criminal aspect of these things cannot be made through a conventional conflict resolution mechanism. That has to do with the kinetic approach. And that is where we have the military, we have the police, we have the DSS, we have all the complements, of the state security and military systems, to deal with. The other second component is to allow for a conventional conflict resolution mechanism, between the different groups, first and foremost, like I said, because it's very important to have a commonality of purpose among the different identities, among the farmers, the herders, and everybody, to understand that, well, we need a common shared resources, because the land water use, we have to find a way to share it. We have to draw the line, to ensure that there is no encroachment, and all that. All those things have to be done. I think another important thing also is in terms of land administration.
Okay, very quickly.
I think that it's important also that as we go forward in Nigeria, no land is a vacant land. Lands are identified, marked, traced, and owned, and perhaps tax collected from it, even though it's rural areas and all that. Enough for people going to acquire large lands, and leaving them empty, and then denying farmers access to land and denying herders to access to pasture their herds. So I think that we need to sincerely do things differently, for us to get the kind of results that we need to get.
We'll have to leave it there. We'll have to do things differently. Thank you very much. Dr. Joseph Ochogwu is the Director General, Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, joining us tonight on Newsnight.